Years passed, and Zara's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The gym that once felt like a battleground now felt like home, a place where people of all shapes, sizes, and backgrounds came together to grow stronger, both physically and mentally. What started as her personal journey had blossomed into something much bigger, a community built on trust, respect, and shared determination. One crisp autumn morning, Zara walked into the gym carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her coach greeted her with his usual nod, sipping from the cup she handed him. "Big day today," he said, raising an eyebrow. She grinned, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. Today wasn't just another training session or sparring match. It was the grand opening of her gym. After months of planning, fundraising, and renovating, the space was finally ready. It wasn't fancy, just an old warehouse she'd turned into a boxing haven, but it was hers. Every corner told a story. Posters of legendary fighters hung alongside hand-painted murals, donated equipment lined the walls, and motivational quotes scribbled by friends and supporters covered the mirrors. As the doors opened, people poured in. Fighters from her old gym showed up, some lugging bags full of gloves and wraps, others bringing snacks for the celebration. Women who'd attended her workshops arrived with their families, eager to see the place they'd heard so much about. Even Jake came holding a bouquet of flowers wrapped in cellophane. "For you," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "Congrats." Zara laughed, accepting the gift. "Thanks, big guy. Means a lot." The energy in the room was electric. Kids ran around laughing and pretending to throw punches. Adults mingled, swapping stories about their own struggles and triumphs. In one corner, a group of teenage girls practiced footwork drills under Zara's watchful eye. They were shy at first, hesitant to throw punches, but Zara encouraged them patiently. "Don't think about hitting hard yet," she instructed gently. "Just focus on moving your feet. Feel the rhythm." Watching them reminded her of herself when she first started, unsure, self-conscious, but determined to push through. She remembered how every small victory boosted her confidence, how each step forward made her feel unstoppable. Now, seeing these young faces light up as they landed their first punch filled her with pride. This was why she did what she did, to create opportunities for others to discover their strength. Later that afternoon, Zara stood at the front of the gym, addressing the crowd. Her voice wavered slightly, not from fear but from emotion. "When I first walked into a boxing gym, I didn't know if I belonged there," she began. "People doubted me. Some laughed at me. But I kept showing up because I believed in myself, even when no one else did." She paused, scanning the room. Faces stared back at her, listening intently. "This gym isn't just about boxing. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you think. Whether you're here to learn self-defense, get fit, or compete, my goal is to help you find your power. Because everyone deserves a space where they feel safe, supported, and strong." Applause erupted, echoing off the high ceilings. People cheered, whistling and clapping until their hands turned red. Zara smiled, blinking back tears. This moment, the culmination of years of hard work, was everything she dreamed of and more. Over time, the gym became a hub for the community. Local schools sent students for after-school programs. Nonprofits partnered with Zara to offer free classes to survivors of violence. Even corporate teams booked sessions to bond over fitness challenges. The diversity within the gym mirrored the city itself, a melting pot of cultures, ages, and experiences united by a common goal: growth. Zara continued competing too, though less frequently than before. Each fight added another layer to her legacy, inspiring even more people to join her cause. One memorable bout ended with a standing ovation from the crowd. As she raised her arms in victory, a young girl in the stands held up a sign that read, "You're my hero!" Zara spotted it mid-ring walk and waved, grinning ear to ear. Afterward, during autograph signings, the same girl approached her shyly. "Can I ask you something?" She whispered, clutching a notebook tightly. "Of course," Zara replied, kneeling down to meet her eye level. The girl hesitated, then blurted out, "Do you think I can be a boxer too, even if I'm not very strong?" Zara placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. Strength doesn't start in your muscles, she explained. It starts in your mind. If you believe in yourself and work hard, you can do anything. Trust me, I was once exactly where you are now. The girl beamed, hugging Zara tightly before running back to her parents. Moments like these fueled Zara's passion. Knowing she was making a difference, not just in one person's life, but in countless lives, kept her going, even on the toughest days. Her impact extended beyond the gym as well. Media outlets featured her story, highlighting her efforts to empower women in underserved communities. She spoke at conferences, sharing insights about resilience and leadership. Companies asked her to endorse products, but she only agreed if the partnership aligned with her values. Money mattered, sure, but purpose mattered more. Still, Zara remained grounded. Despite her success, she never forgot where she came from. On quiet mornings, she'd sit alone in the gym, reflecting on her journey. The road hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, pain, and heartache, but every obstacle had shaped her into who she was today, and she wouldn't change a thing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows, across the gym floor, Zara found herself staring at a photo taped to the wall. It was taken years ago, shortly after her first amateur win. Her face was bruised, her hair damp with sweat, but her smile was radiant. Beside it hung newer pictures, snapshots of workshop participants celebrating their progress, kids proudly wearing boxing gloves twice their size, and adults embracing after tough sparring sessions. Her coach joined her, leaning against the ropes. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. Zara nodded, tracing the edge of the frame with her finger. "Feels like a lifetime ago." He chuckled. "But look what you've built. You've changed lives, including your own." She smiled, turning to face him. "This isn't the end, though. There's still so much more to do." And she meant it. While the gym was thriving, Zara knew her mission was far from complete. She dreamed of expanding her reach, opening branches in other cities and creating scholarships for aspiring fighters. She envisioned a future where anyone, regardless of background, could access the tools they needed to succeed, not just in boxing, but in life. That night, as she locked up the gym and headed home, Zara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She thought about the young girl with the notebook, the women in her workshops, and the fighters who once doubted her but now called her family. They weren't just individuals. They were part of something greater, a movement fueled by courage, perseverance, and belief. Boxing had given Zara a second chance, a platform to rewrite her story. But it had also taught her the true meaning of strength, lifting others as you rise. As she gazed at the stars twinkling above, she whispered a silent promise to keep fighting, keep building, and keep inspiring. Because her journey wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who dared to dream alongside her. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The judge sat still in his car, trying to process what had just happened. He wasn't sure if he'd misheard the officer, or if the man had truly said something so dismissive and loaded. "You people always think you're above the law." Those words echoed in his mind, sharp and biting. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help anyone. Instead, he chose to respond with the same dignity and patience he brought into the courtroom every day. "Officer," he began, his voice steady but firm, "I'm not sure what you mean by you people. I made a mistake, yes, but isn't this just a minor traffic violation? Why are we escalating this?" His polite tone seemed to have the opposite effect. The officer bristled as though the judge's calm demeanor was some kind of personal insult. His face reddened, and his jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like he might walk away, write a ticket, and call it a night. But then something snapped inside him. Maybe it was the long hours on patrol. Maybe it was years of unchecked bias boiling over. Or maybe it was just plain anger looking for an outlet. Whatever it was, it pushed him over the edge. Before the judge could react, the officer yanked open the car door with unnecessary force. The sudden movement startled the judge, who instinctively raised his hand slightly, unsure of what was happening. "Sir, please," he started to say, but the words were cut short. Without warning, the officer grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, pulling him halfway out of the car. The judge stumbled, caught off guard by the sheer aggression of the act. Before he could regain his footing, a fist came flying toward his face. The punch landed hard, sending a shockwave of pain through the judge's body. His lip split instantly, warm blood trickling down his chin. The world around him seemed to blur for a second as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. One moment, he was sitting quietly in his car, answering questions about a minor traffic infraction. The next, he was being physically assaulted by the very person sworn to protect and serve. "Get out of the car," the officer barked, his voice loud and commanding, as though trying to assert even more control over the situation. But the judge barely heard him. His ears rang from the impact, and his mind raced with disbelief. How could this be happening? Despite the pain, the judge managed to compose himself. Years of experience handling high-pressure situations in court taught him how to keep his emotions in check. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped out of the car, keeping his movements measured and non-threatening. Blood dripped onto his crisp white shirt, staining it crimson, but he didn't wipe it away. His focus remained on the officer, whose chest heaved with rage. "What is going on here?" the judge asked, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Why are you doing this?" But the officer didn't answer. Instead, he gripped the judge's arm tightly, twisting it behind his back as though preparing to handcuff him. It was clear now that this wasn't about a missed stop sign anymore. This was something darker, uglier, a manifestation of prejudice and unchecked authority. Just as the officer reached for his handcuffs, headlights appeared in the distance. A second patrol car pulled up alongside them, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a halt. Both men turned their heads, momentarily distracted by the unexpected arrival. Out of the vehicle stepped another officer, a woman wearing the same uniform but carrying herself differently. Her presence radiated confidence and authority, yet there was a kindness in her eyes that set her apart. She glanced at the scene before her, the judge standing there bleeding and clearly injured, while the other officer held him roughly by the arm. Her expression shifted immediately. Confusion gave way to alarm, followed quickly by determination. She recognized the judge right away. Not because she knew him personally, but because she'd seen him countless times in the news, presiding over cases with fairness and integrity. And now here he was, visibly hurt, at the mercy of someone who was supposed to uphold justice, not tear it apart. "Officer," she called out sharply, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "What's going on here? Stand down." Immediately, the aggressive officer froze, his grip loosening slightly on the judge's arm. Recognition dawned on his face. He knew who this woman was. She was well respected within the department, known for her dedication to ethics and accountability. If anyone could see through his actions tonight, it was her. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy in the air. The judge stood motionless, blood still dripping from his lip, while the two officers locked eyes. Then, without hesitation, the female officer moved forward, positioning herself between the judge and the man who had attacked him. "Let go of him," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. When the other officer hesitated, she repeated herself louder this time. "Now!" Reluctantly, the aggressive officer released the judge, taking a step back. His face flushed with shame and anger, but he didn't dare argue further. The female officer wasted no time. She placed herself firmly beside the judge, shielding him from any further harm. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, addressing the judge directly. He nodded, though his hand instinctively went to his injured lip. "I'll live," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. "Thank you for stepping in." She gave him a small nod before turning her attention back to the other officer. "You're under arrest," she announced, her voice unwavering. "Excessive force and assault. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The accused officer sputtered, searching for words to defend himself, but none came. The evidence was undeniable. She had witnessed everything, and her body cam recorded every detail. In a matter of seconds, the roles had reversed. The aggressor was now the one being cuffed, his career, and possibly his freedom, hanging by a thread. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the judge watched silently, his mind swirling with thoughts. What had started as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into something unimaginable. Yet amidst the violence and injustice, there was also a glimmer of hope. Karma, it seemed, worked faster than anyone expected. The female officer escorted the disgraced officer to her patrol car, making sure he was secured properly before returning to the judge. "We need to get you checked out," she said softly. "Do you want me to call an ambulance?" He shook his head. "No, thank you. I'll be fine, but I appreciate your help more than I can say." Her gaze softened and she offered him a reassuring smile. "Justice should never look like that," she said simply. "And I promise you this won't go unanswered." With those words, she walked back to her patrol car, leaving the judge standing there, battered but unbowed. The night was far from over, but one thing was certain. This incident would leave a lasting mark, not just on him but on everyone involved. The night air was heavy, filled with the kind of tension that made it hard to breathe. The judge stood by his car, blood still trickling from his lip, as the female officer locked the aggressor into her patrol car. He watched silently, his mind racing with questions and emotions. What had just happened? How could someone sworn to uphold justice act so brutally? And yet, there was something oddly comforting about the way events unfolded. Justice seemed to have stepped in when he needed it most. Once the disgraced officer was secured, the woman walked back toward the judge. She carried herself with a quiet strength, her uniform crisp despite the chaos of the moment. "Are you sure you don't want me to call an ambulance?" she asked again, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm fine," he replied, though the swelling on his lip told a different story. "But thank you for everything." She nodded, her expression softening. "I couldn't just stand by and watch what was happening. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially not someone who's worked so hard to serve this community." Her words struck a chord deep within him. It wasn't just about being assaulted, it was about the blatant disregard for human dignity, the assumption that his skin color somehow made him less worthy of respect. But instead of dwelling on the anger bubbling inside him, he chose to focus on gratitude, for her presence, for her courage, and for the fact that someone had stepped in before things spiraled even further out of control. "Do you mind if I ask," the judge said after a pause, "how you ended up here tonight?" She hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I was heading back from a community meeting. We've been trying to build trust between law enforcement and residents. It's slow work, but it matters. When I saw what was happening," she trailed off, shaking her head, "I knew I couldn't drive past." The judge nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her decision. In that split second, she hadn't seen rank or power. She'd seen right and wrong. That clarity was rare these days, and it gave him hope. "You're a good cop," he said finally. "The kind we need more of." Her cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment, but she didn't shy away from it. Instead, she straightened her posture, as if reminded of the responsibility resting on her shoulders. "We all took an oath to protect and serve," she said quietly. "Some people forget that part." They stood there for a few moments longer, the hum of passing cars filling the silence. Finally, she broke it. "Look, I'll need your statement about what happened tonight. Can we do that now? Or would you prefer to wait until morning?" The judge thought for a moment. His body ached, and exhaustion was beginning to creep in, but he knew delaying wouldn't help anyone. "Let's get it over with," he said. "The sooner we document this, the better." She nodded, pulling out her notepad. As they spoke, her professionalism shone through. She asked clear, concise questions, giving him space to recount the details without interruption. Every now and then, she jotted down notes, her pen moving quickly across the page. When they finished, she looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "I know this is a lot to process," she said, "but I promise you we'll handle this the right way. You won't have to go through this alone." Her reassurance meant more than she probably realized. For all his years on the bench, handing down verdicts and making tough decisions. The judge never imagined finding himself on the other side of injustice. Yet here he was, vulnerable and raw, relying on strangers to ensure fairness prevailed. As they wrapped up their conversation, another vehicle pulled up. A supervisor from the police department, alerted by the earlier commotion. The arrival of additional officers brought a flurry of activity. Radios crackled, voices overlapped, and cameras flashed as news vans began arriving on the scene. Word of the incident had spread fast, thanks to eyewitnesses capturing snippets on their phones. The judge watched as reporters gathered nearby, microphones in hand, eager for a soundbite. Part of him wanted to retreat, to avoid the spotlight altogether. But another part, the part that believed in accountability, knew he couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about exposing the cracks in a system that allowed such behavior to exist unchecked. "I should say something," he murmured, almost to himself. The female officer glanced at him, reading his thoughts. "Only if you feel ready," she said. "But if you do speak, know that I'll be right here beside you." Her support gave him the push he needed. Squaring his shoulders, he stepped forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in his jaw. The crowd of reporters turned their attention to him, shouting questions all at once. "What happened tonight? Were you targeted because of your race? How does it feel to be attacked by someone in uniform?" He raised a hand, signaling for quiet. Slowly, the noise died down, leaving only the soft hum of cameras recording his every move. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Tonight I experienced firsthand what many in our community face far too often," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. A routine traffic stop turned into an act of aggression, fueled by prejudice and unchecked authority. But let me be clear, this isn't about me. This is about holding those in power accountable, no matter who they are or what badge they wear. His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone listening. Some reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks while others simply stared, moved by the gravity of the moment. Beside him, the female officer stood tall, her presence a silent reminder that change was possible, even within institutions, resistant to it. When he finished speaking, the reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but the judge held up a hand again. "That's all I'll say for now," he told them. "What matters most is ensuring that justice is served, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever felt powerless against those meant to protect them." With that, he stepped back, allowing the officers to take over managing the growing crowd. The female officer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You handled that perfectly," she said softly. He managed a small smile, though his eyes betrayed the weight of the evening. "Thank you," he replied, "for everything." As the night wore on, the scene grew increasingly chaotic. News crews interviewed bystanders, some of whom had witnessed the altercation firsthand. Social media buzzed with reactions, hashtags trending as people shared videos and demanded answers. Meanwhile, the disgraced officer sat silently in the back of the patrol car, his career and possibly his freedom, hanging precariously in the balance. For the judge, the hours ahead promised little rest. There would be paperwork, interviews, and difficult conversations. But amidst the turmoil, one truth remained clear. Justice may take time, but it always finds its way, and sometimes karma moves faster than anyone expects. The morning after the incident brought a new wave of attention and chaos. News outlets across the city ran headlines about what had happened. Judge assaulted during traffic stop. Officer arrested for excessive force. And community demands accountability. Social media exploded with reactions, opinions, and debates. Some praised the judge's composure under pressure, while others condemned the officer's actions as yet another example of systemic issues within law enforcement. For the judge, waking up that day felt surreal. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, examining the bruise forming on his jawline. It wasn't just the physical pain that lingered. It was the emotional toll. The memory of the officer's hostility replayed in his mind like a broken record. Yet, there was also a sense of purpose growing inside him. If this incident could spark meaningful change, then perhaps it wasn't all for nothing. As he prepared to leave his home, reporters were already camped outside his door. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched toward him, and questions flew from every direction. Do you plan to press charges against the officer? How will this affect your work as a judge? What message do you have for the public? He held up a hand, signaling for calm. Despite the fatigue etched into his face, he carried himself with dignity, the same poise he brought to the courtroom each day. I'll only answer a few questions, he said firmly. And I want to make one thing clear. This isn't about revenge or punishment. This is about accountability and ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did last night. His words struck a chord. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing every syllable. One journalist pressed further. What do you think needs to change within law enforcement to prevent incidents like this? The judge paused, choosing his words carefully. Change starts with training, teaching officers how to recognize their own biases and reminding them of the responsibility they hold. But it also requires leadership willing to root out bad behavior when it happens. Too often, we see complaints swept under the rug or dismissed as isolated incidents. Last night proved that ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. His response drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd, but not everyone shared the sentiment. Scrolling through social media later that day, he saw comments defending the disgraced officer, claiming the judge must have provoked him somehow. These remarks stung, though he expected them. Change rarely came without resistance. Meanwhile, the police department scrambled to contain the fallout. Internal Affairs launched an investigation into the officer's conduct, not just from the previous night, but throughout his career. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, and verbal abuse stacked up against him, many of which had been ignored or brushed aside. At a press conference held by the department later that afternoon, the chief of police addressed the public. Standing behind a podium adorned with the department's emblem, he looked visibly uncomfortable, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. We are deeply sorry for what occurred last night, he began, his voice strained. The actions of one individual do not reflect the values of our entire department. We are committed to holding those who violate our code of ethics accountable, and we will take immediate steps to ensure this never happens again. While his apology sounded sincere, skepticism lingered among community members. Many questioned whether this was just lip service, a temporary band-aid slapped over a much deeper wound. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice over excuses and enough is enough." Their chants echoed through the streets, demanding real action rather than empty promises. Back at her precinct, the female officer who had intervened found herself thrust into the spotlight. Colleagues approached her, some offering congratulations for doing the right thing, while others gave her wary looks. She knew stepping in hadn't been easy. It meant challenging a fellow officer, risking backlash from peers, but she didn't regret it for a second. Later that evening, she sat down with her captain for a debriefing. The room was small and dimly lit, the kind of space where difficult conversations often took place. Her captain leaned back in his chair, studying her closely. "You realize this is going to follow you around for a while?" he said bluntly. "People are calling you a hero, but not everyone sees it that way." She nodded, unfazed. "I'm okay with that. What matters is that justice was served last night. That man, the judge, deserved better than what he got." Her captain sighed, running a hand over his face. "Look, I'm not saying you were wrong. You did exactly what you're supposed to do. But be ready for pushback. Not everyone likes seeing cops called out for misconduct." "I know," she replied simply. "But if we don't stand up for what's right, who will?" Her resolve inspired those around her. Officers who had previously kept quiet about questionable behavior began speaking up, sharing stories of times they'd witnessed misconduct but felt powerless to act. Slowly, a shift started to occur, not just within the department, but throughout the community. People realized that change was possible, even in places resistant to it. For the disgraced officer, however, the consequences were swift and severe. Stripped of his badge and placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges, he faced a future filled with uncertainty. His colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed by his actions. Even his family struggled to defend him, torn between loyalty and disbelief. In court, the case against him moved quickly. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, body cam footage, witness testimonies, and a pattern of past complaints. The judge overseeing the trial listened intently, his expression unreadable. When the verdict came down, guilty of aggravated assault and violating civil rights, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Justice had been served, but the scars would remain for years to come. Outside the courthouse, supporters of the assaulted judge gathered, cheering loudly. For many, the conviction represented more than just one man being held accountable. It symbolized hope that the system could still deliver fairness when it mattered most. Amidst the celebrations, the judge reflected quietly on the events of the past few days. He knew this victory was bittersweet. While accountability had been achieved, the underlying issues plaguing law enforcement remained unresolved. True reform would require time, effort, and courage from everyone involved. That evening, as he sat alone in his living room, he thought about the female officer who had stepped in when no one else would. Her bravery reminded him that even in moments of darkness, light could break through. Maybe that was the lesson to take away, not just for himself, but for anyone fighting for justice. The days following the conviction were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. For the judge, life didn't return to normal. It couldn't. The incident had left an indelible mark, not just on him, but on the entire community. Every morning he woke up to find his inbox flooded with messages from people across the city. Some thanked him for standing tall in the face of injustice, while others shared their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. Each message weighed heavily on him, reminding him that his experience wasn't isolated. It was part of a much larger pattern. Instead of retreating into privacy, the judge decided to use his platform to push for change. He began meeting with community leaders, activists, and even members of the police department who were open to reform. These conversations weren't always easy. There were moments of tension, disagreements about how best to move forward, and raw emotions bubbling to the surface. But through it all, one thing became clear. People wanted solutions, not just apologies. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, the judge sat down at his desk and stared out the window. The city lights twinkled below, a reminder of the countless lives affected by decisions made within its walls. He thought about the young boy he'd met earlier that week during a school visit, a bright-eyed child full of questions about fairness and justice. When the boy asked what made the judge so brave, he realized something important. Courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about doing what was right, even when fear tried to hold you back. With renewed determination, the judge drafted a proposal for a series of initiatives aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Training programs focused on recognizing implicit bias, mentorship opportunities pairing seasoned officers with rookies, and town hall meetings where residents could voice concerns directly to police leadership. All these ideas flowed onto the page as he worked late into the night. By the time he finished, exhaustion pulled at him, but there was a spark of hope in his chest. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but every step forward mattered. Meanwhile, the disgraced officer found himself navigating a world far removed from the authority and respect he once commanded. Inside the prison walls, he quickly learned that inmates didn't take kindly to those who abused their power. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and the disdain in other prisoners' eyes mirrored the shame he felt deep inside. Nights were the hardest. Alone in his cell, he replayed the events of that fateful traffic stop over and over again, wondering how things might have been different if he'd chosen a different path. During visits from his family, tears often filled their eyes. His wife struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the headlines plastered across newspapers. "Why did you let your anger get the better of you?" she asked one afternoon, her voice trembling. He didn't have an answer. At day, least not one that could undo the damage he'd caused. All he could do was sit silently, staring at the floor, haunted by regret. In quieter moments, he thought about the judge, the man whose life he'd disrupted, and wondered if he'd ever find a way to forgive himself. On the flip side, the female officer who had intervened continued to inspire those around her. Her actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Colleagues began approaching her for advice on handling difficult situations ethically. She became a mentor of sorts, sharing her perspective without judgment or pretense. "It's not about being perfect," she told them. "It's about owning up when we mess up and making sure we learn from it." Her influence extended beyond the precinct. Community groups invited her to speak at events, eager to hear firsthand how accountability could exist within law enforcement. At one such gathering, a young woman stood up and asked, "What gave you the courage to step in when so many others might have stayed quiet?" The officer smiled softly before answering. "Courage isn't something you're born with," she said. "It's something you choose moment by moment. I saw someone in need and I knew I couldn't walk away, that's all it took." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, earning applause that lasted several minutes. Afterward, dozens of people lined up to thank her personally, shaking her hand and expressing gratitude for giving them faith in the system again. It was a humbling experience, one that reminded her why she'd joined the force in the first place. Back in the courtroom, the judge resumed his duties with a renewed sense of purpose. As he presided over cases, he made a point to address defendants and attorneys alike with empathy and understanding. Justice, he believed, wasn't just about delivering verdicts. It was about ensuring everyone felt heard and respected along the way. One day, a young man stood before him, visibly nervous as he awaited sentencing for a minor offense. Instead of rushing through the proceedings, the judge took the time to ask questions, listening intently to the answers. When the hearing concluded, the young man hesitated before speaking. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for treating me like a person." The judge nodded, offering a small smile. "That's all any of us should expect," he replied. Word of his approach spread quickly, earning him even more admiration from the public. People began referring to him as the People's Judge, a title he accepted humbly. To him, it wasn't about recognition. It was about living up to the ideals he'd fought so hard to protect. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that single night continued to unfold. The police department implemented some of the reforms proposed by the judge, including mandatory bias training and increased transparency in handling complaints. While progress was slow, it was undeniable. Residents reported feeling safer, knowing that efforts were being made to rebuild trust. In the end, the story of that chaotic Tuesday evening became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a catalyst for change. For the judge, it reinforced his belief in the power of resilience and integrity. For the female officer, it solidified her role as a beacon of hope within her profession. And for the disgraced officer, it served as a painful yet necessary lesson in accountability. But perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone watching that justice, though imperfect, is worth fighting for. Karma may strike unexpectedly, but true healing comes from the choices we make afterward. Months had passed since that fateful night, and the city of Atlanta was beginning to feel different, though not entirely healed. Change rarely happens overnight, but the seeds planted in the aftermath of the incident were starting to sprout. The judge, the female officer, and even the disgraced officer became symbols of larger truths about justice, accountability, and redemption. Each played a role in shaping the narrative of what happened and what could come next. For the judge, life settled into a rhythm of purposeful action. He no longer viewed his courtroom as simply a place to deliver verdicts. It had transformed into a platform for fostering understanding and fairness. Every case he presided over became an opportunity to remind people of the humanity behind the law. Whether addressing defendants or speaking with victims, he made sure everyone left feeling acknowledged, not dismissed or forgotten. One chilly morning, the judge arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. As he walked through the grand marble halls, he noticed a group of schoolchildren on a field trip. Wide-eyed and curious, they whispered excitedly among themselves, pointing at the towering columns and polished floors. Their teacher ushered them toward the gallery, where they would observe a trial firsthand. The judge smiled faintly, remembering his own visit to a courthouse as a child. It had been a pivotal moment, sparking his lifelong passion for justice. When the teacher approached him afterward to ask if he'd speak to the students briefly, he agreed without hesitation. Standing before the eager faces, he began by asking a simple question: "What does justice mean to you?" Hands shot up immediately, each child eager to share their thoughts. One boy said, "It means making things fair." A girl added, "It means helping people who can't help themselves." Another chimed in, "It means punishing bad guys." The judge chuckled softly at the last response. "Well," he said, leaning forward slightly, "justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's also about teaching, healing, and giving people a chance to do better." He went on to explain how fairness wasn't always easy to achieve, especially when emotions ran high or biases clouded judgment. But he emphasized that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is what separates justice from revenge. When the session ended, the children swarmed around him, peppering him with questions. One little boy tugged gently at his sleeve, his brow furrowed in thought. "Judge," he asked earnestly, "what made you so brave? Weren't you scared when that cop hurt you?" The judge knelt down so he was eye level with the boy, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Of course I was scared," he admitted, "but bravery doesn't mean never being afraid. It means doing what's right, even when fear tries to stop you. And remember this: kindness matters. Treat others the way you'd want to be treated, because your actions will always come back to you, one way or another." The boy nodded solemnly, as though committing those words to memory. Watching the exchange, the teacher wiped away a tear, moved by the simplicity and depth of the message. Meanwhile, the female officer continued to inspire change within her department. Her efforts weren't limited to formal training programs or policy reforms. They extended to everyday interactions. She took rookies under her wing, teaching them not just how to enforce laws, but how to connect with the community they served. During ride-alongs, she encouraged them to step out of their patrol cars, introduce themselves, and listen to residents' concerns. "People are more likely to trust us when they see us as humans, not just uniforms," she explained during one such outing. Her approach worked. Slowly but surely, relationships between officers and residents began to improve. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved hello. Parents felt comfortable approaching officers to report issues instead of staying silent. Even small victories mattered. They signaled progress. But the officer knew there was still work to be done. Late one evening, after finishing her shift, she sat in her car outside the precinct, staring at the dashboard. The weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. Could one person really make a difference? Then she remembered the judge's words during a recent meeting. Change starts with individuals willing to stand up. If enough of us take that first step, we create momentum. With renewed resolve, she turned the key in the ignition and drove home, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As for the disgraced officer, life inside prison remained harsh and unforgiving. Days blurred together, marked only by meals, head counts, and brief periods of recreation. At night, lying awake in his cell, he replayed every decision that had led him here. The moments of unchecked anger, the dismissive remarks, the abuse of power. Regret gnawed at him constantly. For years he'd convinced himself that he was untouchable, above reproach. Now stripped of his badge and reputation, he realized how wrong he'd been. Inmates mocked him openly, calling him the cop who got caught. Guards treated him with disdain, refusing to offer even basic courtesies. Yet, amidst the darkness, a flicker of hope emerged. During a counseling session required as part of his rehabilitation program, he met a therapist who challenged him to confront his biases. At first he resisted, defensive and bitter, but over time something shifted. He began to see how deeply ingrained prejudices had shaped his worldview, and how much harm they'd caused. It's never too late to change, the therapist told him one day. You can't undo the past, but you can choose how to move forward. The key words resonated deeply. Though freedom still felt distant, he vowed to use his time in prison to reflect, grow, and prepare for a future where he might earn forgiveness, not just from others, but from himself. Back in the city, the story of that chaotic Tuesday evening continued to ripple outward. News outlets revisited the case periodically, highlighting updates on police reform efforts and community initiatives. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for All and Accountability Matters, keeping the conversation alive. For many, the incident served as a turning point, a reminder that justice is fragile and requires constant vigilance. It showed that while karma may strike unexpectedly, true healing comes from learning, growing, and choosing to do better. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the judge stood on the steps of the courthouse. He watched as families strolled by, laughter echoing through the air. Children chased each other playfully, while parents exchanged smiles and nods. In that moment, he allowed himself to feel hopeful. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but progress was happening, one step, one choice, one act of courage at a time.